we have another Ocean title this issue with Super Hunchback, a port of an arcade platformer. We have maps of the first 3 levels. Well, this is the best Ocean game we've gotten thus far, which is damning with faint praise. It's also a fairly mediocre platformer, which speaks volumes that the only good Ocean game just manages to be mediocre. This game does manage to balance having sprites with character and a field of view that lets you plan ahead fairly well, but there's nothing about this game that particularly grabs me. I realize that this series has been in existence in arcades and on PCs for quite some time, but it's ultimately not a game with much character to it. It's a platformer. It's competent. It works. That's all it does. Continuing with our Game Boy titles, we have Terminator 2 Judgment Day. We have maps of the first 4 stages, before giving some notes on the 5th and final stage. This is a pretty crappy game. I am generally not a fan of action games that give you a game over after one death, unless that game also has the good sense to give the player a bunch of health power-ups. This game doesn't do that. It throws a lot of enemies at you, along with a puzzle at the start of the game that basically requires you to restart the game if you mess up. Skip this game. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It's a bad LJN licensed game. Next, we move on to a couple more arcade ports with Game Boy versions of Q*bert and Asteroids, with notes on both. So let's start with Q*bert. I'm not a fan of Q*bert. I find the game rather boring, and the difficulty of the game based more on the increasing size of the game's levels and number of enemies rather than actual complexity to the game. Yeah, you have more enemies and they have different movement patterns, but it's just that the maps are bigger. All they are is big. That's not necessarily helpful, and additionally, because of the size of the Game Boy screen, you don't have all of the map on your screen. So, for example, if you have an enemy that is changing the color on the tiles, you can't tell there's an enemy changing the color of the tiles and account for that in your movements, which would, in theory, add some strategy and planning. Instead, you just have your very limited viewpoint. I will say this for Q*bert. It is the only game I've covered thus far that has handled isometric movement well. Specifically, it does this by moving the character in discrete, distinct spaces with each movement, rather than having you be able to move basically anywhere in 3 dimensions, which in turn consequently requires you to have to judge distance with your camera angle. Asteroids, on the other hand, is, well, Asteroids. It is a good enough port of Asteroids. It plays the same, except the actual asteroids are more round sprites as opposed to the sort of wireframe digitized graphics that they were in the original game. Wireframe is exactly the right word because it wasn't 3D, but it is an outline of what the asteroid shape would be. Additionally, it avoids the problem that the 2600 version of Asteroids had, where if you sit in the middle of the screen, you are otherwise completely safe. Still, this game does have the problem that the size of the Game Boy screen makes it feel more confining than it did in the original game. It's a decent port, but the source game is one I'd still prefer to play on a console instead of a portable device. That said, the game doesn't have enough to it to really merit a full-on NES port. At least not one that I'm willing to pick up. Maybe if it was compiled with a bunch of other games, I would find it more of interest. In this installment of Super Mario Adventures, for this issue, Bowser decides to hold the Mushroom Kingdom hostage, with the cost being Princess Peach's hand in marriage. Peach is having absolutely none of this, and, rather than being kidnapped, heads off in pursuit of Bowser, with Mario and Luigi following along behind. Why can't we get more of this version of Peach in the video games? Really? This is a take-charge, no-nonsense character who still can be all sweet and that sort of thing when she's not getting Bowser to go away. In any case, moving on, we have the first of the Goemon games to get a US release here with Legend of the Mystical Ninja, though the characters' names have been, distressingly, made into bad stereotypes of quote-unquote Oriental names. Kid Ying and Dr. Yang. I suppose I should be grateful that the names weren't changed to Kid Ching and Dr. Chong, but that's probably too many letters for the very large typeface they use in-game. The article itself gives a rundown in all the mini-games and shops you find in each town, along with a map of the first action level and notes on subsequent levels, with village maps of the first 4 cities being on the poster. It bears mentioning that the synopsis of each level sticks with the names from the Japanese version of the game. So, you're starting in the town of Hagure, near Edo, moving on to Hyotoko Village, and so on. I apologize for mentioning the names. So, the Ching Chong Ding Dong names given to our main characters was a decision made by Konami. Still, I don't know if the fact that the developers were doing this, or to the characters, or rather the US publishers were doing this to characters of the same ethnicity as the developers, if that whole thing is better or worse than the racist names that we got for the antagonists in the US release of Metal Gear on the NES. Anyway, gameplay-wise, Legend of the Mystical Ninja is a fun game, but it's also a game that's kind of unforgiving and kind of grindy. You power up your weapons through random drops from enemies, and your speed and jump height from power-ups you buy from shops. Getting you hit causes you to drop your jump height by 1 and your weapon upgrade by 1, which can be, depending on how far you've gotten upgraded, a tremendous setback, and is actually a little more unforgiving than the Castlevania games are. Yeah, when you die in Castlevania, you lose all your weapon power-ups, but you have a health bar and you can take a few hits before you die. And usually, when you die, the next few candles you run into will have power-ups for your whip that will get you back up to full fairly promptly. Now, this isn't to say that Legend of the Mystical Ninja isn't fun. It is fun. But it also means this game is one that actually requires more of a long stretch for play, as opposed to just sitting down and playing it whenever. Which kind of causes a problem for the show, because that's how I play games for this show, because I have so many games to get through per episode. Still, if you can find a copy affordably, it's definitely something that's worth checking out. We come next to the second SNES RPG we've covered, Ys 3, Wanderers from Ys. This is kind of doubly of note, as the NES ports of Ys Books 1 and 2 never got a US release on the NES. The MS-DOS versions did make it out here, so it is possible that people buying this game had played earlier installments of the series, but still, that may be a bit of a stretch. In any case, this is the first, console port of the Ys games to come out, at least on a Nintendo console, thus far. We have maps of some of the early areas in the game, and I should note that they brought back their incidental artist from the earlier Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy articles for the incidental art here, and it looks great. The article covers the game through Gabalan Island. I apologize for mangling the pronunciation of that name. The Ys games are some of the grindiest RPGs in the history of consoles, and Ys 3 is pretty much no exception. Like Zelda 2, the game shifts from a top-down perspective to a side-scrolling perspective. Though I'd say the shift works a little better here than in Zelda 2 with the change of level design and the added detail that you get with a 16-bit console. The game is still fun to play, and the music is still great. Frankly, I don't think I've ever played an Ys game with bad music. Blah. That said, this game has also been heavily remade, with the most recent remake as Ys, the Oath, and Felghana being available on PC and the PSP, and thus by extension, also on the Vita and the PlayStation TV. If you're going to pick this game up, I would honestly recommend going with the remake over this original SNES version, partially because it'll actually be easier to find, because you can just go out and get it right now, and also because there's some gameplay tweaks to make it a little easier to play. Now the time has come for the Super Nintendo to have its own light gun, and it's shipping with a collection of mini-games known as the Super Scope 6. Because I'm capturing most of this footage with an emulator, and even if it wasn't my TV's an LCD, I can't really properly review these games. Yeah, I could just do the shooting with my mouse, but then if I'm doing the shooting with my mouse, I'm really not actually replicating how accurate the light gun is and that sort of stuff. Still, in any case, we have notes on two of the games here. As an aside, due to the Famicom sniper segments of Game Center CX, I'm finding it completely impossible to take the design of the Super Scope seriously. I just keep thinking of just Reno, and I realize I'm mangling his name, in the offices, staring out the window with a pair of binoculars strapped to the Super Scope, trying to see what game somebody's handing to, one of the ADs is handing to another AD at the intersection below the building. Anyway, moving on. In Counselor's Corner, we have a Cliff Notes overview of how to rescue Rosa in Final Fantasy II, or 4, depending on which port you're playing. This issue, in Nestor's Adventures, Nestor is playing Super Castlevania 4, where he learns a valuable lesson from Simon Belmont. Sometimes it is better to run past enemies over fighting everything. I am really pleased that the quality appears to be returning to Nestor's Adventures. I'm also kind of wishing that Nestor's Adventures had its second page back to give the tips a bit more time to be set up and give the jokes room to breathe. In the Now Playing Review column, we've noticed a review of Blaster Master Boy for the Game Boy, which was panned by our two reviewers. In our Top 20 column this issue, it is dominated by Mario on all three platforms. This issue's celeb profile is doubling up, with Kelly Williams and Darius McCrary from Family Matters appearing. Williams is still acting, primarily in sitcoms, and McCrary is also acting. In the article, it mentions that McCrary was working on an album, and as of this writing, that album still hasn't come out yet in the past decade. 2 decades, actually. Anyway, McCrary's acting roles have been more of a mix of comedic and dramatic work, as opposed to Williams' just sticking with comedy. In Pack Watch, Contra 3 is on the way for the Super Nintendo. I'm looking forward to that. This issue we don't exactly have an obvious pick, so I'm just going with one this time. I'm going to go with The Legend of the Mystical Ninja as my pick of the week, though I do also recommend picking up Ys, The Oath and Felghana, particularly since odds are good that it will end up available cheap in a Steam sale. Next issue, I've already looked ahead, and our cover game is Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. This is a biggie, so look forward to that next time. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please support my Patreon. Link will be below in the show notes. There's also going to be a link on the YouTube channel up here somewhere. Thank you very much for watching. See you once again. I'll see you next time.